Recording started.
All right, so we're going to do this recording or session here to prepare for the last test. Actually, we haven't even come up with a date for the test, so maybe we'll talk about that after we're done here. But anyways, in the lessons we talked about some different ways that people use animals, and there's some ways that are used in almost every culture. There's some uses of animals that are that occur in almost every culture, and there's some that are kind of just occurring in some cultures and not others. But some of the most common ones are using animals for food, medicine, and recreation. So food, of course, hamburgers, right? I don't know, are you guys like me and you like hamburgers? There's a place in Edmonton called Five Guys Burgers and Fries, and I really love the place. Got really good burgers. So anyways, so food is one use, and medicine is another. Things like elk antler velvet in Alberta, that's kind of one use of elk for medicinal purposes. Okay. All right, just let me know when you're back. So yeah, maybe we'll just hold off for a few minutes here, Haley. Okay, so you camped out on the front lawn, eh? That's pretty cool. So that was this weekend, you said? Okay. Now, do you like camping quite a bit overall, or more doing it with friends? Like, do you like to go with your family to, campgrounds and stuff like that? Oh, okay. Oh yeah. Yeah, we have a tent trailer. I know some people prefer like a trailer because, then it's kind of permanently up. You don't have to put it up and down. Ours does have this electric lift, which is kind of nice. You just kind of hold on to this thing and then it goes up. As long as the battery doesn't wear down or something, because the only problem with our electric lift, if the battery does wear out, then you've got to do it manually, and doing it manually is a lot slower than, like, most people have a manual one, where you got to crank, and most of those crank things, they work pretty well. Like, they'll put it up in maybe about half the time our electric lift does, but if our electric lift stops, then, oh man, it's really slow. It'll take like maybe an hour and a half to put it up, just to put it up or down. So gotta hope that the electric lift kind of holds in there. But yeah, our family likes camping a lot. We went last summer to see my family in Ontario. This year we're not going to go quite so far. Probably going to, okay, no problems. Yeah, so this year we're probably going to go into BC for a bit. I always love BC, just so green and beautiful, with all the trees and the rivers and all that. So yeah, we were talking about the different uses of animals. So of course, food and medicine. So elk antler velvet is fairly common in Alberta, and of course recreation. Things like horse racing, right? And I talked about the fact that there's some other uses of animals that are kind of used in some countries, but not in others. So for instance, in some countries they use them as labor, and I just kind of wrote here that sometimes animals that are used for labor are kind of beasts of burden. Even in the Middle Eastern days, I think about, the donkey that carried Jesus, that's what you might call a beast of burden, right? And some countries, they get animals to do lots of things, like elephants and stuff like that. They do a lot of different types of activities for heavy lifting and that sort of thing. And so, of course, in countries like Canada, that are rich or affluent countries, you don't see animals used quite as much at this point for lifting things or for labor. Okay, so we're going to just look at this point at a little bit of the different ways in which animals appear in art, and just specifically having to do with pictures. I don't know if you guys have seen a lot of paintings before by Canadian artists. This guy is Robert Bateman, and I just chose this one specifically because we actually have this painting in our house. So he's a well-known Canadian painter, and what he's known for is realistic paintings. So realistic paintings, like the name suggests, they're realistic. They look like what they look like in real life, right? Whereas if you compare Robert Bateman's paintings, this is another famous Canadian painter, and I don't know, have you guys ever heard of the Group of Seven? They're a group of 7 Canadian painters. I think they were around about 50 years ago, I'm not sure exactly. Anyways, this is one of the Group of 7, Tom Thompson. And so when you look at these paintings, they're not exactly what you'd call realistic, right? I mean, they do suggest what you'd see out in nature, but they're a little bit more of an interpretation sort of an idea, and so they're called impressionistic, this kind of painting. Okay, so this is more impressionistic than realistic. And something like this is another Canadian painter. This guy's Ken Danby. His paintings are quite realistic, but they don't really have to do with wildlife. Okay, so Robert Bateman is probably one of the more well-known Canadians for wildlife paintings. But I think this guy's paintings are really good too, Ken Danby. This guy is not a Canadian at all, but I just kind of thought I'd pop this up here. Have you ever heard of Picasso before? Yeah, his paintings are pretty well known. You know, what he kind of does is he'll take different things like body parts and he'll put them, a lot of times he'll put them in different places so they look really weird. Like he'll have an eye here. I don't know if that's an eye. But sometimes he'll have his hands coming out of someone's head or something like that. And this is known as cubism. So I've never really tried it before, but it does look like an interesting form of art. All right, so what we have here is a picture of a creature called a tapir. I don't know if you've seen those very much before, but both beetles and tapir are used to produce medicine in Brazil. And so the reason they use these tapirs is to treat asthma, and also the beetles are used to treat epilepsy. And I don't know if you guys have known anyone who's had epilepsy before, but this is the most common symptom is seizures. Have you ever had a friend or a family member that has epilepsy or has had seizures before? Yeah, it can be a little bit scary if you haven't seen it before. You know, I used to work in group homes with special needs kids, and sometimes what would happen is, you know, somebody in the home would have seizures some of the time, and so what you do is, I don't know if you guys are familiar with those baby monitors where it's kind of like a walkie-talkie and you can hear what's going on in the baby's room. So we use those actually, and so when I would go to sleep at the group home, you know, sometimes I'd be woken up in the middle of the night because I'd hear kind of this rustling sound, really violent kind of sound in the other room, and the person was having a seizure. So it is a little bit startling if you've never seen anyone do it before. And of course you have to take precautions, you know, make sure that their tongue doesn't get in the back of their mouth, swallow their tongue and that sort of thing. So anyways, so these guys are used to treat epilepsy. How about asthma? Have you guys, either of you had asthma before? Oh, is that right, eh? So do you use an inhaler for that? Okay. Yeah, my oldest son, he was allergic to dogs a few years ago, so I had to use one of those. Fortunately, he's not allergic anymore. At this point, we're just going to talk a little bit about Aesop's fables. And so these are special kind of stories. You guys have probably heard these before, eh? Like The Boy Who Cried Wolf. You remember that one? Okay, so that's one example, and I just wrote here, let's face it, sometimes we prefer not to take advice from other people, right? But if a furry dog came up to you and gave you the same advice, you might possibly take it, right? So that's kind of the idea behind Aesop's fables, is that lessons in life are sometimes better delivered through animals than through people, right? We accept them a little better. So, of course, the lesson of The Boy Who Cried Wolf is that it's always important to tell the truth to people, because if you lie often enough, they might not believe you, even if you are telling the truth at that point, right? So the boy in the village, you know, was always saying there's a wolf in the village, wolf in the village, but then, and there was no wolf every time he'd call the villagers, but then when the wolf really did appear, then nobody believed him, right? So that's kind of the lesson of that one. This one here is another good story, The Tortoise and the Hare, and the moral of this story is, well, I should have asked you guys what it was. But I guess since I've already got it written down here, slow and steady wins the race. That's one way of thinking of it, right? You know, this hare kept saying, well, I'm going to win the race, and he was so confident in himself that he just went to sleep by the side of the track, and our little turtle friend eventually caught up and won the race, right? So, again, you know, morality lessons are really good uses of animals for those kind of stories. So now we're just going to talk a little bit about Ducks Unlimited. You guys have probably heard of that before, right? It's a pretty common agency in Alberta. You've probably seen like people with hats on and shirts on. So it's devoted to the preservation of wildlife, or not wildlife, I should say, to wetlands. And so wetlands are important parts of our ecosystems, and they really serve three main purposes. So we'll just talk about those three things really quickly. First of all, they provide a location for recreation activities and enjoying nature. So we'll look on the next page and see an example of a rec activity. They filter the water, which is of course important, and they protect from storms and floods. Okay, so those are the three main things that we need to know about wetlands. And so this picture here is showing an example of duck hunting, which is a recreational use of wetlands. Now I know Aiden's family really likes to hunt, right? Aiden, I know your brother Adam likes to hunt, and am I right that Stephen does too? I can't remember which of your brothers like to hunt. Okay, you do as well, right? Okay, awesome. Haley, how about you? Do you hunt as well? Okay, I haven't either myself, unless you call swatting mosquitoes. I don't think so though, right? So yeah, anyways, so it's kind of showing a rec activity there. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about Greenpeace. And so Greenpeace was started in 1971. Have you guys heard of that before, Greenpeace? Okay, well, maybe because it started, you know, that long ago, sometimes kids nowadays might not be so familiar with it. I was born in '66, so, you know, I guess at the time I was growing up, it was kind of starting to come into its infancy. But it's what you call a protectionist group. And its main efforts are directed at human activities, human organizations that it believes are robbing animals of their rights. So for instance, Greenpeace has protested about the seal hunt in Canada's Arctic. And they've also tried to prevent whaling ships from harvesting whales. I'll show you a picture here that kind of shows some of the things they do. So here's a whaling vessel, and this is a Greenpeace. Okay, now wait a second. I don't know if this is maybe a Greenpeace boat, and maybe there's a whaling vessel somewhere else. That's probably what it is. Anyways, the people from Greenpeace, they've painted Help End Whaling, and you can see that they've painted in blood red, so with the kind of idea of, you know, that the whales are dying and that sort of thing. And with, you know, the seal hunt, when I was growing up, there were a lot of people that were protesting about the seal hunt. The main reason was the way that they killed the seals, you know, clubbed them over the head. And so that was the main protest. So a lot of times it has to do with how they're killing them. So that's kind of the way. That's just a little bit about what Greenpeace is about. I'm not really sure, honestly, if they're really that big nowadays. But you know, a lot of people, they're not familiar with the fact that they actually started in Canada, and they are an international organization, though. So this guy is a funny bird. And this is a dodo bird. So he's a funny-looking bird. I don't know if that's why he went extinct. But actually, he was a bird that measured only about 3 feet tall, and he was unable to fly. So, you know, that's probably why he went extinct. I don't know if I think I read that he did have feathers earlier on, but probably, you know, the fact he didn't have feathers, that wiped him out. So, so the dodo bird did go extinct. On the other hand, excuse me, there are some other animals that have been close to extinction that haven't quite gone extinct. For instance, leopard frogs, bisons, and whooping cranes. You know, at one point they were close to extinction, but through the efforts of animal preservationists, they've been brought back from extinction. You know, it's kind of interesting, guys. When I was with the other teachers, we were up in McLennan, for the student activity on Friday, and I actually, as we were driving along the road, I forget which highway it was, but we saw a car, and in this car there was a bison, like a live bison. I have no idea why the bison was in the car, but what first kind of made me look in that direction, there were cars lined up. There were probably about 10 cars on the side of the road, and I guess they were just taking a picture of this bison, you know. So, of course, that would look pretty cool. So anyways, yeah, again, bison were pretty close to extinction at one point and no longer are. So people have different views, of course, when it comes to using animals, right? Animal preservationists, as we've seen already, such as people from Greenpeace, they want to preserve the lives of animals at all costs. But we got another word here, which is utilitarian. I don't know, have you guys ever come across that word before in like social studies or something like that? Okay, excuse me. So utilitarian basically means that people have the right to use animals for their benefit. Of course, keeping in mind they need to exercise compassion as they care for them and all that. But it's basically that, like, the idea is that animals are like a tool. Okay, you might have, like, if you hear about a utility knife or something like that, you know, if you've got a toolbox and you've got a utility knife, it's a tool, right? Okay, so that's the idea behind utilitarian. It's basically using animals for people's benefits. All right, what we'll talk about at this point is, you know, who's responsible for wildlife? Who is it that has to take care of them and manage their numbers and you know, do research on them and all that? Well, actually, one of the parties that are involved here doesn't do research, but government agencies are one of the parties that are responsible for taking care of wildlife, and also landowners. Okay, so if you have land, of course, and you have a creature on your land, you have the right to you know, get rid of it if you want to, or do whatever. So thinking about a government agency, the Canadian Wildlife Service carries out research on behalf of animals and, you know, protects them from, you know, if they're polluted, if their environment is polluted. So if, for instance, you know, sometimes oil is spilled in a certain area and you get messy spill that covers birds. You guys have seen that before, eh? On TV or whatever. So, you know, government agencies have to take care of wildlife, and this here is just showing an example of, you know, coyotes on someone's property. You know, that's something interesting. I find the word coyote, when I was in Ontario, everybody called them coyotes. Here it seems like everybody calls them coyotes, right? Is that what you guys find as well? Yeah, I just noticed that. So I was kind of bugging my father-in-law and saying, oh, you know, you guys are saying you're wrong. But then I looked on the internet and they actually said both ways are acceptable. So, you know, it doesn't matter how you say it. Okay, so which form of government is controlling the wildlife? Well, it's both the federal and provincial governments, right? And so that's why I show these two flags. Okay, so both of those are responsible for animals living in Alberta, but the way it's kind of divided out to know, you know, who's responsible for which wildlife is wildlife that's found on provincial land is managed by the provincial government, while animals that are found on, you know, federal land is the responsibility of the federal government. So most of the land in Alberta is going to be the provincial government, so most wildlife are controlled by the provincial government. This here is just showing you Jasper National Park, where you see elk. I always find, I don't know, do you guys go to both Jasper and Banff? Have you been to both of them before? Okay. I always tend to find there's a bit more as far as wildlife in Jasper. Okay, so here's a question for you guys. Which level of government do you think would manage the Department of Oceans and Fisheries? Do you think that would be, you know, if you were, say you're out east somewhere in, say, Nova Scotia. I know, Haley, you've been out there before, right? You've got some family out there. Yeah. So okay, let's say you're out in Nova Scotia and you're talking about the fish. You know, who's responsible for the fish out there? Which level of government do you think is going to manage the Department of Oceans and Fisheries off the coast of you know, somewhere out in Nova Scotia? I'm trying to think. What is the city that's on the coast there? Is it St. John or St. John's? I always get mixed up with the two there. Do you think it would be the provincial or the federal? I think Haley's typing something. Am I right? Okay, yeah. Okay, so St. John's, Newfoundland. That sounds right, and St. John is New Brunswick. Okay, thanks. Good thing I'm not a social studies teacher. Okay, so the answer to this, the level of government that manages the Department of Oceans and Fisheries, that's the federal government, okay? So our oceans kind of belong to the country as a whole, right? And so this here is just showing an example of an officer from the Department of Oceans and Fisheries who's examining a beached whale, okay? And then the picture below is showing an example of a migratory bird. So migratory bird, like their name suggests, you know, they migrate somewhere else, right? So this is a Canada goose, and they migrate to the United States. And so migratory birds are regulated by both provincial and federal governments. Okay? All right, so who are these guys? They're a bunch of caribou. I remember when I went up once to a place called Fort Good Hope, which was just south of the Arctic Circle. I went there, I don't know what it was, maybe 6, 7 years ago. Anyways, I had some caribou meat there. So caribou are found in large numbers in this area called the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Okay, so that's right here. And that is actually a place that's shared by both Canada and the U.S., as you can see here, right? It's mostly in the U.S. And so caribou are one of the animals that are managed by both Canadians and Americans in this wildlife refuge. Okay, so we're going to look at what they call different spheres of society. Okay, so there's different areas of society that affect wildlife and the environment, and these are what they are: political, economic, scientific, and social. I don't know if you guys remember, earlier in the year we talked about stakeholders, and that was kind of an important term for the course. And stakeholders are people that have an interest in wildlife, and they usually have different perspectives on what should be done with them. And but when we talk about the different spheres of society, so different areas of society that make decisions relating to wildlife, political decisions, or the political sphere, is one area, and that's made by members of the government, right? Economics, I'm sure you guys are familiar with that, right? Economics has to do with money, so that's decisions that relate to money. Social decisions, okay, what are they? Well, they're having to do with large groups of people, right? Okay, so any decision that affects large groups of people is going to be a social decision. And of course, scientific decisions, like the name suggests, are made by scientists, or at least people that work directly with scientists. And I think we're pretty close. This is our last page right here. And do you guys know of anyone who's ever written a letter to the newspaper or anything like that, just to express their feelings on you know, something that's going on in government, or you know, something they've heard about in the news? Okay. All right, Haley, would you mind sharing something about that? Just kind of in general, what they wrote their letter on? Okay. I know there's a place in Edmonton, or sorry, not in Edmonton. I meant to say Alberta. It's called the Gazoo Zoo. It's kind of a weird name, the Gazoo Zoo, and there were a lot of letters that were written to the Edmonton Examiner that were expressing concern about the way that they handled their wildlife there, the animals that are in the zoo. So I don't know. Can you guys think of any other examples of letters that people write to, to the newspaper or whatever? Of course, it's usually things that they feel very strongly about, right? And you remember earlier in the year we talked about Lucy the elephant, and we talked about Bob Barker, the guy who was a game show host, how he was coming up to Canada and just expressing his feelings that Lucy really shouldn't be in our zoo because he said it's too cold here and the elephant is too isolated, should be with other elephants, and it's going to become sick and die. So that's an example of a letter of concern that someone could write. So also people sometimes write letters of support as well. So, if they feel like something's going really well, they're saying keep it up. So letters of concern are usually when you want some new action to occur, like move Lucy the elephant from the zoo, whereas letters of support are usually when there's something, some current action that you want to be maintained. So maybe if you want to encourage city workers, like, if they're controlling the mosquitoes and you want to say, good job, guys, keep it up, then you might write a letter of support. So anyways, those are some different examples of letters. And I guess at this point we're done, guys. And maybe I'll just stop the recording at this point and we'll just have a quick discussion about